Welcome to Sign Facts, where every movie hides a secret. Every scene tells a deeper story. And every frame contains details most viewers never notice, from legendary blockbusters and mind-bending science fiction to dark thrillers, unforgettable horror, and hidden cinematic gems. We explore the facts, theories, Easter eggs, behind-the-scenes secrets, and untold stories that make movies truly unforgettable. This isn't just watching movies, this is discovering what lies beneath them. Subscribe to Sign Facts and step beyond the screen. We learn that her father is constantly working, constantly pushing himself, and because of that, he can't be with her as much as she'd like. Still, he notices everything. He scolds her for not wearing the steel-toe boots he bought her. Worried she might get hurt, she laughs it off and asks him to make a finger heart for her camera. With only 2 days left before she returns to China, every moment with him now matters. Before leaving, she reminds him to be careful because of his old head injury. They say a quick goodbye to a customer before parting ways. Not long after, at a nearby stall, a debt collector corners an elderly woman and demands his money. She tries to count the cash properly, but he snaps at her to stop counting and just hand it over. Watching from nearby, the father mutters in Mandarin, disgusted that anyone would bully an old woman like that. Later, at home, his daughter tries to change his mind. She begs him to let her stay in the Philippines and help him instead of going back to China. But he's already made arrangements. He's found a buyer from Eastport, and not just any buyer, a wealthy one. Elsewhere, Naveen says moving 3 children would be easy for him, but in exchange, he wants something: a direct meeting with the man's boss. Back at the father's home, a news broadcast reports the disappearance of journalist Maddie Affin. In older footage, Maddie argues that these kidnappings aren't random. She insists the missing children all come from the same impoverished neighborhoods. To her, that's no coincidence. It looks like an organized operation targeting the city's poorest and most vulnerable kids. The police refuse to comment, while nearby, Rainey keeps training. In the Philippines, her father keeps pushing her through her practice. Later, a woman tells Rainey she should cut her hair short, saying it would be more practical. Rainey refuses immediately, insisting she'd look awful, and adds that her classmates already tease her and call her a tomboy. She doesn't need anything making it worse. Her father doesn't soften the lesson. He tells her he'd rather see her alive than pretty. Then he admits the truth behind all the training: he can't always be there to protect her. Rainey's frustration finally breaks through. She tells him she only trains because it gives her time with him. She never actually cared about kung fu. What she really wants is for him to come back to China with her. Her pain spills out as she reminds him that her mother is already gone, and now it feels like he's abandoning her too. Crying harder, she screams that he never loved her. A stranger nearby coldly tells her that yelling won't make her father run after her. Moments later, another man approaches Rainey and asks if she understands Chinese. He claims his sister has been hit by a car and desperately needs help. Worried, Rainey follows him down the street, not realizing she's being led away. As they move deeper into the area, the man tells her to slow down and casually asks about her leg. Then, without warning, he grabs her. Rainey screams. Speaking in Filipino, one of the traffickers complains that grabbing just one kid is hardly worth the trouble. Still, they force Rainey into a waiting truck. Her father sees what's happening and charges after the vehicle on foot. Cars honk wildly as he cuts through traffic, refusing to slow down. Inside the truck, one of the traffickers orders the others to pull him away from the road. He fights with everything he has, but there are too many of them, and they beat him back and overpower him. The truck pulls away with Rainey still trapped inside. Her father forces himself up as men shout at him to stop, but his attention is only on his daughter. Rainey, trained to defend herself but now completely terrified, screams for him from inside the truck. When she tries to struggle free, a trafficker orders someone to grab her before she can escape. The tires screech against the road as the truck speeds off with Rainey still crying out for her father. He collapses in the middle of the street, gasping for air. Unable to chase any farther, sirens echo in the distance as he stumbles into a nearby shop, bleeding heavily. The shopkeeper looks at him with alarm and complains that he's getting blood all over the counter. Instead of really helping, the man just points him toward a hospital down the street. Desperate, the father writes down what he can remember, especially a description of the large bald man involved in the attack. At the police station, someone tells him to sit down and wait if he wants to report a crime. An officer snaps at him, warning him not to cause trouble again. Someone else mentions that this is a kidnapping case, but he's still told to simply wait. The father has a license plate number and a physical description of one of the attackers, but none of it seems to matter. The captain looks over the information and decides it doesn't amount to a proper report. Instead of sending anyone after the kidnappers, he keeps the paperwork for himself, and just like that, the case is buried before it even begins. When they look into the father, nothing useful comes back. No driver's license, no work records, no criminal file. There's no trace of a normal life attached to him. It's almost as if he appeared from nowhere. Someone assumes he must be running from something. Elsewhere, Rainey sits alone and frightened, calling out for her dad. At the same time, a police officer leans close to the father and demands to know who he really is. Meanwhile, deep inside an underground fight club, the crowd roars as two fighters trade brutal blows in the ring. The referee signals for the next round to begin. Nearby, someone advises staying calm, having a drink, and waiting for the right moment, saying the man will agree to almost anything if handled correctly. A large man is ordered to stand because a guest has arrived. Naveen enters, pretending to be connected to a supplier, and greets everyone with an easy smile. Song, the trafficker boss who runs the club, studies him carefully, trying to figure out what kind of man he's dealing with. Song asks if Naveen is seriously requesting 30 children for the weekend. Naveen explains this isn't for some private party the children are meant for shrimp boats leaving out of Eastport. Song is immediately uneasy, saying 30 kids is no small delivery to him. That's practically like moving an entire school bus full of children. Naveen doesn't flinch. He offers 3 times the usual market rate to make it worth Song's trouble, every dollar in cash, then adds one final condition: he must be allowed to personally choose every child himself. Song bursts into laughter, brushing the request aside as ridiculous, telling Naveen that's not how their business works. Naveen stays calm and explains he just wants to confirm the quality before any money changes hands. Song smirks, mocking the idea that Naveen can stroll through the children like he's picking fruit at a market. Before the tension can settle, one of the guards suddenly grabs Naveen and yanks him forward, demanding to know who he really is, accusing him of being far too dumb to belong to whatever operation he claims to represent. Naveen keeps playing his role, insisting he's only there as a messenger for his partner, then warns them that the longer they drag this out, the more of his partner's time they're wasting. Song watches him for a moment, amused by his confidence. Instead of killing him on the spot, he decides he actually likes Naveen's boldness and tells him he'll personally take him to choose the kids himself. But when they move toward the exit, the guards outside stop them, saying the gathering is strictly invitation only. Then everything changes in an instant. Someone in the crowd spots a gun. Panic rips through the place as people scream and scatter in every direction. One of the thugs yells for his men to kill whoever brought the weapon inside. Downstairs, a guard rushes to Song and warns him there's a problem somewhere in the building. Naveen insists the gun has nothing to do with him, but Song's patience is gone, and the order comes without hesitation: kill him. Naveen has no choice now. He launches into a fight, forcing his way through Song's men as the club collapses into total disorder. One attacker after another goes down while the crowd outside keeps roaring, hungry for the violence to end in blood. Naveen breaks free from another thug with bone-cracking force as a microphone overhead screeches with feedback. One of the criminals taunts him, telling him to enjoy the party. Naveen answers by snapping the next attacker's neck. But Naveen isn't the only one who's fought his way into the club. The silent father has too. Seeing Naveen in the middle of the chaos, He mistakes him for one of Song's men and grabs him hard. Naveen shouts at him to wait, swearing he's not with Song, and quickly explains that they're both searching for someone. With sirens closing in outside, Naveen urges him to leave together before the police and Song's backup trap them inside. Guards pound on a nearby door, shouting for reinforcements. Naveen promises that if the father comes with him, he'll show him everything he knows. Elsewhere, Song takes his anger out on a young informant, accusing the boy of vouching for a traitor and telling him to watch his own father die. The boy breaks down, begging for mercy, insisting he's sorry and doesn't want to die. Song's men accuse him of setting them up, demanding again and again why he betrayed them, calling him stupid for trusting the wrong people. The other children, frightened and angry, throw the same word back at him. One of the captors warns the children that the bad ones get punished. Another man steps in and orders them to keep the kids alive and ship them out instead. Later, the silent father asks Naveen if he knows a mute fighter named Ho. Naveen explains that Ho was thrown into Song's fighting ring as a kid, almost as some sick joke. He then realizes they're talking about the same man. He knows Ho too. Naveen turns serious and apologizes for the chaos, explaining he's been living in hiding, trying to piece this whole operation together. He tells the father that Song is the biggest human trafficker in the city, and that his wife and journalist Tae had gathered the evidence they now have on Song's network. She disappeared while investigating this exact case. Naveen says her name was Meisha, and spreads out the photos and documents she left behind so the silent father can look through them. One picture is a birthday card that reads, "Happy birthday, Daddy." Naveen admits he still hasn't gone through everything Meisha gathered, but from what she found, Song constantly moves the children around while vetting potential buyers. Then something in one of the photos catches the silent father's eye. Naveen notices it too. It's the same truck, a refrigerated delivery truck. Naveen realizes the vehicle is perfect for hiding children. It makes deliveries all over the city, blending into normal traffic without raising suspicion, and because of the insulation, the cargo area would be completely soundproof. No crying, no screaming, no calls for help would ever be heard from outside. The factory tied to the truck is only about an hour away, so they head there immediately. When they arrive, Naveen is stunned by how open everything is, as the whole operation has been sitting in plain sight. The silent father wants to storm in right away, but Naveen stops him. Charging in blindly won't save Rainey. If they move too soon, they might lose their only chance. So they wait and watch. But the guards notice movement near the fence, and one yells for whoever's out there to leave. Within seconds, men pour out from every side of the building. The silent father doesn't run. He drives straight into the first wave of guards, smashing through them with terrifying speed. One man barely gets close before the father snaps his neck and keeps moving like nothing happened. Someone growls that trespassing isn't allowed on his father's land. Then Song appears and opens fire, screaming for the intruder to die, shouting that they're inside his house now, daring them to take the bullets and drop dead. One guard recognizes the silent father from the earlier kidnapping and blurts out, "You again." The father answers with movement instead of words, faking one direction before striking from another. Song's confidence starts to crack as the fight turns against him. Ho, the mute fighter Song raised since childhood, joins the battle too, his fierce battle cry echoing through the warehouse. Somewhere nearby, a terrified child sobs in the shadows. The fight grows uglier and more brutal by the second. Bones break, bodies hit the floor. The silent father finally gets his hands on Song and starts speeding him with pure rage. Naveen has to pull him off before he kills him. Then a gunshot cuts through the air. Naveen shouts at him, asking if he's lost his mind. Song is still their only lead. Killing him now means they might never find Rainey. It won't bring her any closer. Naveen reminds him she could still be alive, and that they're getting closer to her with every passing hour. Meanwhile, the police captain gets word that a fight's broken out at the factory. He assumes it's the Chinese mute, still hunting for his daughter, and knows the old man behind the operation will want answers for how badly security failed. Pak Lung responds with calm control, Claiming full responsibility, he lies, saying the factory was already empty by the time the attackers arrived. A few men were killed, he admits, but nothing important was lost. And promises to cover any additional costs out of his own earnings. After the call ends, Pak Lung drops the polite tone and mutters that this fool is becoming reckless. Back at the factory, Song is tied down and being shocked for information. Naveen calls out, warning them they need him awake, not dead, and says he'll handle the questioning himself. He steps closer to Song and tells him he's been investigating him for months. The man standing behind him wants only one thing: his little girl back. Naveen makes it clear that if Song refuses to talk, his name will be exposed to the entire world, and even if they don't kill him, his life won't be worth much once the truth comes out. Song sneers through the pain and asks Naveen if he has any idea what happened to the last reporter who came digging around, warning him that journalists always think they can handle the truth until they end up buried under it. The silent father reacts immediately, his anger rising as he demands to know if Song means Naveen's wife, ordering him to tell them everything right then and there. Song keeps repeating that he knows nothing, clinging to the lie as long as he can. The silent father presses the wire against him again and shocks him hard. Song finally breaks, gasping for breath, and says he heard about her from a place called the Snake Pit. Then he warns them that nobody taken there ever comes back out alive. Inside the Snake Pit, Rainey sits among the trapped children. A boy tells her there's no escape from this place, but Rainey refuses to accept that. She says they can't know that unless they at least try. The boy begs her not to drag him into some hopeless plan. Rainey argues that if they do nothing, they're dead for certain anyway. The boy's voice lowers as he admits he has nowhere to return to. He never had a real home, and the traffickers murdered his family right in front of him. Rainey tells him that if she gets out, he can come home with her. He looks at her like she's lost her mind and calls her crazy for even suggesting it. At the pier, Song orders his men to prepare the boat. Before he can disappear, Pak Lung arrives and calmly asks where he thinks he's going, questioning whether Song's really planning to run for the boats now. His tone sharpens as he asks what Song told the Chinese mute. Back in the Snake Pit, a guard checks on the children and calls for Rainey to come down, saying someone's asking for her. The moment he turns away, Rainey and the boy make their move and bolt. Rainey shouts for him to keep running and not look back. At the same time, Naveen begins a live broadcast from his missing wife's account. For months he's been posting under Meisha's name, trying to keep her investigation alive and make sure people don't forget her. Looking into the camera, he states his own name and hers, making clear who he is and why he's there. He tells viewers he's broadcasting from a place known as the Snake Pit and believes Meisha may be trapped somewhere inside as well. He begs everyone watching to share the stream immediately if they want to expose this operation. They need people in the streets, watching and reacting in real time. Then he sees something on screen and reacts in shock, barely able to believe what's unfolding. Inside the building, Rainey finally reaches her father. The moment she sees him, she breaks down completely, sobbing and apologizing again and again, overwhelmed by fear and guilt. But even after escaping, she insists she has to go back for the other children. She says they'll all be killed, and if she leaves them behind, it'll be her fault. Her father comforts her and tells her she did well, then gently asks where the rest of the children are being held. She tells him they're locked in a room upstairs. He tells her he'll handle it from here and orders her to go home. Naveen steps in and says he'll stay behind instead. Rainey's done her part, but his work isn't finished yet. He tells one of the guards to get her out of the building immediately. In Filipino, a guard radios for help, reporting intruders inside the Snake Pit. Outside, police officers scramble to locate where the live stream is coming from. The captain angrily orders Sergeant Yedong to stand down. Yedong pushes back, arguing that the video clearly shows children being held inside the building. The captain tells him to clear the street and let it go. Another officer tries to block Yedong from moving forward, but Yedong tells him plainly to get out of the way. then looks at the captain in disbelief and asks if he's actually serious about ignoring what's happening right in front of them. Inside, one of the guards shouts that the intruders have already reached the upper floor. A trafficker orders his men to keep the children together because they're moving out. The kids scream as they're dragged toward the exit. Rainey fights against the men holding her, twisting and struggling until she breaks free hard enough to snap one man's grip. In Mandarin, she calls out to her father, telling him they're there to help. Guards rush to grab her again as she keeps shouting. Her father tears through them, breaking bones and clearing a path with brutal precision. Rainey tells him some of her friends are still trapped upstairs. The boy she helped escape calls out for her to wait. Rainey urges the children forward, telling them to move quickly, run, and not stop. The boy asks in Mandarin why she came back when she'd already escaped. Rainey tells him that even if he has no family left, he still has friends. He calls her an idiot for risking herself, and she throws it right back, saying they're all idiots together. Up above, more trapped children look down from a high ledge, frightened and unsure how to get down safely. Rainey tells them to use a makeshift rope. In Filipino, the children shout instructions to each other, telling one another to tie the knots as tight as possible. Rainey calls up, reminding them to climb down slowly and carefully. Outside, a woman in the crowd begs the police to let them help, shouting that the children are what matters, not the chain of command. Rainey waves the next child down the rope. People in the crowd start yelling at the officers, accusing them of standing around doing nothing, calling them cowards for refusing to save the kids. Yayan finally turns away from the captain and speaks to his own unit, telling them to come with him. They can no longer pretend they don't see what's happening. An officer is ordered to remove Sasha for disobeying the captain's command, but the captain barks at Sasha directly, ordering him to stand down and repeating the demand for obedience. Yayan ignores the pressure and tells his squad to cover the exit. Upstairs, the boy tells Rainey it's her turn to climb down. Before she goes, he thanks her, saying he owes her his life. Rainey tells him she'll see him outside, but as the last children try to escape, a guard is cut down while trying to stop them. The scene explodes into panic as gunfire breaks out near the exit. People scream and scatter. The boy calls out in fear, asking if Rainey's okay. She shouts back that she's fine. Another gunshot cracks through the chaos as guards try to seize control of the exit again. Then the police finally storm the building, shouting for everyone to freeze and drop their weapons. One guard calls over the radio for medics to help the children. An officer comforts one of the rescued kids, telling them they don't have to be afraid anymore. Another officer asks whether Rainey's father was found inside too. Someone explains that the woman connected to the rescue is the journalist whose reporting helped lead them there. Soon after, the news reports that unrest broke out during the live-streamed rescue. Dozens of trafficked children were pulled from a downtown building, turning the hidden operation into a public scandal. The report reveals that the building is connected to a powerful local businessman named Kuntil Wo. But before the broadcast can continue, a phone rings, pulling the attention of someone watching it away. At the mansion, a woman is quietly told her father wants to see her. Her husband, the police captain, is brought in to answer for what happened. The message is clear: he's not there as family, but as someone who has to account for his actions. The old man looks at him with cold disappointment and says that, speaking as one father to another, what he's done is revolting. He says he could understand weapons, could even understand drugs, but children are something else entirely. Then he asks why loyalty seems to matter only when there's money attached. Pak Lung loses his temper, reminding everyone he warned them this man would become a problem, and now, because of him, they're all left cleaning up the damage. The captain is grabbed by guards and starts shouting that he's still a police officer, but the old man isn't moved. He reminds him that he brought him into this family, gave him his own daughter, trusted him with that bond day, and this is how he chose to repay him. Then, without hesitation, the old man drives a blade into him himself. His daughter watches in horror, unable to understand what's happening, asking why. Again and again, as the man she married collapses in front of her. At the police station, an officer takes Naveen's statement and asks him to sign it. She tells him she can testify that his actions were self-defense, but officially, she still can't let him walk out until bail is approved. She assures him his daughter will be cared for until then. Then she looks at him more closely and asks the question everyone keeps asking: who is he, really? Naveen gives the simplest answer he can: he's only a father. Later, the silent father visits Naveen at the station. Everything that happened to all those children making it out alive, they only happened because Rainey chose to turn back instead of saving herself. Naveen admits something painful. The night Meisha disappeared, she called him. At the time, he wanted them both to leave the country and start over somewhere safer. In truth, he wanted to protect only their own lives. But Meisha couldn't let go of the missing children. She was too close to the truth, and he never understood just how close until she was already gone. Now all he can hope is that when he finds her, she'll somehow forgive him. Elsewhere, one of Naveen's colleagues praises what he managed to do that day and jokingly asks if that means she's getting a promotion. Meanwhile, the silent father tells Rainey it's time for them to go home. A guard warns them they only have 5 minutes left. At their new house, guards disguised as renovation workers complain about the ongoing repairs. One says he'll go check the breaker box. Nearby, hidden out of view, a gunman quietly readies his weapon. Thunder rolls outside at the exact moment he fires, covering the sound as the guard is shot down. More gunshots tear through the house. Another attacker corners Rainey and warns her not to make even the smallest sound. Rainey whispers that her father's in danger, but the gunman orders her to stay still and not move. 2 more shots echo from upstairs. Her father shouts for her to find the key, telling her to hold on just a little longer, to keep pushing and not give up. An armed man is suddenly ordered to stop exactly where he is. A police move in, demanding he drop his weapon. Nearby, Naveen is on the floor, groaning in pain, badly wounded and barely able to move. In the chaos, Rainey cries out for her father. Then Pak Lung finally comes face to face with the silent father. He says he must be the mute everyone's been talking about, and reveals that he was once going to become a father himself. In his twisted mind, he blames the silent father for stealing that future from him. The two crash into each other in a savage close-range fight. The silent father shouts for Rainey to run, telling her to go, to hurry, but she screams as men grab her and pull her back away from him. He yells again, desperate for her to escape. Neither fighter backs down. They trade brutal strikes, each one refusing to fall. Later, Rainey is still running through the storm, exhausted and gasping for breath. She stumbles hard, groaning in pain, but forces herself back onto her feet. A broken arrow drops onto the ground beside her. Even hurt, she keeps pushing forward. Someone screams that the silent father killed their father. Ho, still fighting on Pak Lung's side, cries out in rage. But Pak Lung turns on Ho with cruelty instead, mocking him for ever believing Cowboy was his father, then tells him the truth as sharply as possible. Ho was never Song's son. Pak Lung cuts him off with a scream before he can fully react. Rainey shouts at Pak Lung, calling him evil. The fight continues without slowing, growing more desperate by the second. But Ho is shaken by what he's just learned. Now the truth finally breaks whatever loyalty he had left. He turns against Pak Lung's men and stabs one of them, refusing to obey any longer. Pak Lung then turns his attention to Naveen, taunting him about the reporter, asking if Naveen was the one who gave Meisha the ring she wore. Then he confirms the worst thing Naveen could hear: Meisha didn't die quickly, she suffered for a long time. Pak Lung throws something toward him and tells him that if he wants it back, he should come and take it, provoking him, daring him to attack. Naveen, consumed by grief and rage, charges forward and slashes at him. This time, Pak Lung is badly wounded and finally drops but even bleeding and weakened, he roars in defiance, refusing to show fear. The fight reaches its most chaotic and painful point. Someone screams as everything collapses around them. Ho, now dying weakly, calls out to his friend and says he found her but before he can finish, his voice fades away. Pak Lung, Still not done, grabs Rainey and tells her father that now he'll finally watch a daughter die. The silent father calls out, asking if Rainey's okay. Pak Lung tells him this is simply the fate waiting for him and orders him to accept it. Then there's the sickening sound of bone breaking as the father escapes the hold on him. Pak Lung shouts, still refusing to surrender. Rainey cries out for her dad again, begging them to stop fighting, panic rising as she screams for him. She screams for her father while the boy beside her cries out for his uncle, begging him to wake up and not close his eyes. The boy joins her, pleading with him not to die. Pak Lung finally begins to choke and retch, completely defeated. In his last confused moments, his mind drifts elsewhere. He murmurs that he has to go home, talking about a wife and daughter who are already gone as if they're still waiting for him. The father looks at him and simply says goodbye in his own quiet way. Pak Lung speaks the name of his unborn child one final time. Rainey and the boy rush to her father's side, crying out for him, calling him dad again and again. For a moment, the three of them sit together in silence, with no words strong enough for what they've survived. Later, by the water, Naveen tells him the entire trafficking ring has been taken down. Then he admits that after everything they went through together, he still doesn't even know his friend's real name. The silent father finally answers. His name is Wang Wei. He tells Naveen that if a person is brave enough to change himself, he can change the world too. This time, the words feel different, not like a lesson, but like a truth he's earned. Wang Wei. Sometime later, Rainey is dressed beautifully, and Wang Wei tells her she looks pretty. She asks if he's finally ready to tell her his story. He begins softly. When I first met your mother, every once in a while, an action movie comes along that doesn't politely ask for your attention, that grabs you by the collar, throws you into the room, and dares you to look away. That's basically what The Furious feels like. This isn't the kind of movie you walk into expecting layered psychology, quiet character studies, or some deeply complicated crime saga, and honestly, that's not what it's trying to be. The Furious knows exactly what it's selling, and it sells it with both fists, both knees, probably a hammer, maybe a ladder, and whatever else happens to be lying around the room. For action fans, that's the appeal. There are movies where you admire the action, and then there are movies where the action makes you physically react in your seat. This is the second kind, the kind where you laugh not because something's funny, but because a fight scene just did something so ridiculous, so sharp, so perfectly timed that your brain needs a second to catch up. You sit there thinking, wait, are they actually doing this? And then the movie somehow goes even harder. That's where The Furious becomes special. It's brutal, fast, messy in the best way, and completely committed to its own madness. It doesn't feel like a film built around safe studio notes or clean little trailer moments. It feels like a group of people who genuinely love martial arts cinema got together and decided, let's see how far we can push this before somebody tells us to stop. And nobody stopped them. Now, is it perfect? Not even close, depending on what you care about. The story is simple, the emotional material is there, but it isn't always explored with much depth. Some of the dialogue and dramatic scenes don't land as strongly as the action does. There are definitely moments where you can feel the movie saying, look, just get through this part, the next fight is coming. But the thing is, the next fight usually is coming, and it's usually insane. That's why a lot of the flaws almost start to feel smaller while you're watching, not because they're invisible, but because the film's strengths are so loud, so physical, and so entertaining that they keep overpowering everything else. You're not watching The Furious for a perfectly polished dramatic experience. You're watching it for impact, for rhythm, for bodies crashing through spaces, for choreography that keeps finding one more idea when you think the scene has already peaked. That's the reason this movie has hit so hard with action fans. It gives you the feeling people chase when they talk about The Raid, John Wick, old Hong Kong fight cinema, or those martial arts films you discover and immediately want to force your friends to watch. It has that same "you need to see this" energy. Maybe some viewers will find it too violent, maybe some will think the story's too thin, maybe others will wait for streaming and be perfectly fine with that. Fair enough. But if you love action movies, not just casual action, but real, full-body, bruising, creatively staged martial arts chaos, then The Furious is absolutely one of those films you shouldn't ignore. It's rough around the edges, sure, but it's alive, and in modern action cinema, that kind of raw energy is getting harder and harder to find. The story of The Furious is about as straightforward as action movie storytelling gets. A father's daughter is taken, the people responsible are part of a criminal trafficking ring, and from that point on, the movie basically says, alright, now watch this man tear through everyone in his way. That's the setup. Clean, familiar, and honestly not very original. You've seen versions of this before. Taken as the obvious comparison, Man on Fire comes to mind too. Even a bunch of Jason Statham-style revenge thrillers have lived in the same territory. Someone's family is taken, the wrong man is pushed too far, and suddenly every bad guy in the city has made the worst mistake of their life. So no, The Furious isn't winning points for reinventing the revenge thriller, but here's the thing, it doesn't really need to. Sometimes a simple story works because it gives the movie a strong enough reason to move. And that's exactly what happens here. The plot isn't complicated, but it's clear. You understand what Wang wants, you understand why he can't stop, you understand why every fight matters to him, even when the movie itself is more interested in the physical chaos than the emotional details. And honestly, that simplicity helps the film more than it hurts it. A more complicated plot might have slowed this thing down. More twists, more exposition, more crime world politics could easily have gotten in the way. The Furious isn't built like a mystery, it's built like a charge forward. One door opens, another fight starts, one enemy falls, another steps in. The story is basically the fuse, and the action is the explosion. That doesn't mean the writing is especially deep. It's not. The kidnapping premise is familiar, the criminals are familiar, and the emotional beats are pretty direct. But for this kind of movie, direct isn't always a bad thing. There's something effective about a story that doesn't waste time pretending to be more complicated than it is. A father wants his daughter back. That's enough. The movie understands that as long as the motivation is strong, the audience will follow the violence. We don't need a long speech explaining his pain. We don't need 5 flashbacks spelling out every piece of his past. We just need to feel that once this man starts moving, nothing is going to stop him. And The Furious does that very well. It takes the most basic revenge movie setup imaginable and uses it as a launchpad for something much bigger, louder, and nastier than the plot description suggests. On paper, it sounds like another familiar rescue thriller. In motion, it becomes a relentless martial arts assault where the simplicity of the story almost becomes part of the appeal, because at some point, you stop asking whether the plot is new and start asking how the next poor guy is going to survive being in the same room as this father. The darker side of The Furious is what gives the movie its initial punch, even before the actual punches start flying, because this isn't just a random revenge story where someone steals a car, takes a briefcase, or messes with the wrong retired assassin. The central crime here is child trafficking. Wang's daughter is taken, other children are caught in the same nightmare, and suddenly the movie has a much uglier emotional foundation than a simple bad guys need to be beaten up setup. To be fair, that immediately gives the story weight. You don't need a complicated explanation for why this father is willing to break every bone in the room. The moment his daughter disappears into the criminal system, the movie's already done enough to make his rage understandable. It's personal, it's horrifying, and it gives every fight scene an extra layer of desperation. He's not fighting for pride. He's not fighting to prove he's the toughest man alive. He's fighting because stopping isn't an option. At the same time, this is where the movie gets a little tricky, because The Furious touches on some genuinely disturbing subjects: child trafficking, criminal exploitation, corruption, violence against vulnerable people, but it doesn't really sit with them for long. It brings those ideas into the story, uses them to light the fuse, and then moves straight into action mode. The emotional horror is there, but the film doesn't slow down enough to explore it in a deep or uncomfortable way. Some viewers might find that frustrating, and honestly, I get it. A subject this heavy could have supported a much more serious crime drama, an entire film just about the emotional damage, the fear, the system behind it, the people who look away, the families left behind. But The Furious isn't that movie. It's using this darkness as motivation, not as its main investigation. That doesn't mean the emotion is absent, though. What keeps the premise from feeling completely empty is the father's urgency. The film may not fully unpack the larger tragedy, but it understands the immediate human one. A parent loses a child. A man is pushed into a world that's cruel, violent, and much bigger than him. And instead of collapsing under that fear, he turns all of it into motion. That's the emotional engine of the film. The corruption around him also matters because it makes the mission feel more hopeless. It's not just one villain hiding in one room. It's a whole system of criminals, enforcers, people in power, and people who benefit from staying silent. So every step forward feels like Kwang is punching through another layer of something rotten. Still, the movie isn't subtle about any of this, and it's not trying to be. The good people are desperate, the bad people are disgusting, and the moral line is drawn in thick black ink. But for this type of action cinema, that bluntness kind of works. It gives the audience permission to fully root for the violence, because the targets are presented as people who've earned every bit of punishment coming their way. So yes, The Furious uses heavy subject matter in a very action-driven way. It doesn't explore the darkness as deeply as it could, and it doesn't pause for long emotional beats, but it does give the film a reason to feel angry, and that anger is important. Without it, the movie would just be a collection of brutal fight scenes. With it, those fight scenes feel like a father trying to rip his way through an entire underworld before it swallows his daughter completely. Now, as much as The Furious works as a pure action experience, this is where the movie starts showing its bruises. The script is thin, very thin, honestly, and the strange thing is, you can tell the movie is aware of that sometimes. It keeps things moving so aggressively that it almost dares you to stop and ask questions. Why is this character here? Why does this side plot matter? Why are the villains doing anything beyond being evil enough to get kicked through a wall later? Most of the time, the answer is simple. Because the next fight needs to happen. That's not automatically a deal breaker, especially in a martial arts movie built around momentum. But it does mean the dramatic scenes don't always carry the weight they're supposed to. The emotional beats are there: a missing daughter, a reporter connected to the case, a criminal syndicate, corrupt systems, families being destroyed. On paper, that should be heavy stuff, but the movie rarely gives those ideas enough room to breathe. Instead, a lot of the character writing feels functional. People exist to push the mission forward, explain something quickly, or create a reason for another violent encounter. And once you notice that, some of the quieter scenes can feel a bit flat, not unbearable, just not as alive as the action. The dialogue doesn't help either. There are lines that feel awkward, clunky, or just weirdly translated. Sometimes the words don't sound like natural conversation, they sound like dialogue built to deliver information and then get out of the way. And when the film is trying to be emotional, that becomes a problem, because instead of feeling the pain of the moment, you start noticing how unnatural the delivery feels. That's probably one reason the silent protagonist works better than he should. Wang doesn't have to explain everything. He doesn't have to fight through bad speeches. He just has to look broken, angry, focused, and ready to move. Tony Jaa can sell that physically, and honestly, the movie benefits from not forcing him into too many dramatic monologues. But for everyone around him, the writing is more exposed. The side characters don't always get enough personality. The villains are mostly bad because the movie needs them to be bad. Some extra details are thrown in here and there, but they don't really deepen them in a meaningful way. You get the sense that the film wants to add texture, but it's much more confident staging a fight than building a layered scene between people. That's the trade-off with The Furious. When bodies are moving, the movie feels almost unstoppable. When people are standing around talking, it can feel like the film is waiting for itself to become exciting again. Still, I don't think the weak script ruins the movie, not for what this is. The story gives us enough motivation to care, and the performances give us just enough human feeling to keep the violence from becoming completely empty. But it's definitely the area where the film feels least polished. If the action is operating at a 10, the writing is somewhere much lower. And maybe that's why The Furious feels so uneven on paper but so powerful in motion. It's not a great drama hiding inside an action movie, it's an action movie dragging a basic drama behind it. And somehow, because the action is that good, the whole thing still keeps moving. Wang Wei is an interesting kind of action hero, because he barely gives the movie words to work with. He's not the guy who walks into a room and delivers a cold one-liner before breaking somebody's jaw. He's not explaining his past, giving speeches about justice, or telling the villains exactly how badly they messed up. Most of the time, he just looks at the situation, absorbs what's happened, and moves. And honestly, that silence is a big part of why he works. There's something scary about a character who doesn't need to announce his rage. Wang's anger isn't loud, it's locked in. You can see it in the way he carries himself, in how quickly he reacts, and in how little space there is between him and violence once his daughter is taken. He doesn't feel like a man trying to look cool. He feels like a man whose entire world has been reduced to one purpose: find his daughter. That's it. Everything else is just something standing in the way. Xie Miao does a lot with that stillness, because when a character doesn't speak, the performance has to come through the body, the eyes, the timing, the tension in the face. And he gives Wang this focused, almost haunted quality. He's not just a fighting machine, even though the movie absolutely treats him like one at times. There's a father underneath all of that brutality. And that matters. You feel that his violence comes from panic as much as rage, and that's what keeps him from becoming just another unstoppable action hero. Yes, the movie pushes his endurance to ridiculous levels. Yes, there are moments where he survives things that would leave a normal person finished. But emotionally, the idea is simple enough to stay believable, and this man can't afford to stop. Not because he's invincible, but because stopping means accepting the worst possible outcome. At the same time, the movie never fully explains him, and that can be frustrating. Why is he mute? What exactly is his background? How did this ordinary-looking tradesman become so terrifying in a fight? The film hints there's more to him, but it doesn't really open that door. Maybe that mystery is supposed to make him feel more mythic, more like a force than a fully explained person. But there are definitely moments where the silence feels less like character design and more like the script avoiding a problem, because after a while, the movie has to work around him. That's where Naveen comes in, and you can feel the story leaning on him to do some of the talking Wang can't do. Sometimes it works, because the team-up gives the movie a little more movement outside the fights, but sometimes it makes Wang's silence feel like a limitation the filmmakers are trying to patch over. Still, when the movie is in motion, Wang's quietness becomes one of its strongest weapons. He doesn't need to tell us he's desperate, the fights tell us. The way he throws himself into danger tells us. The way he keeps going after being beaten, cut, smashed, and pushed past any normal human limit tells us. His body becomes the dialogue, and for a movie like The Furious, that's probably the right choice. Wang Wei may not be deeply written in the traditional sense, but he has presence, he has purpose, he has that silent, relentless quality that action cinema loves when it's done right. You don't come away knowing every detail about him, but you understand the one thing that matters most. Someone took his child, and now the entire criminal underworld has to deal with the consequences. Naveen is where The Furious tries to widen the story beyond just one father and one missing daughter. Wang's pain is the center of the movie, no question. That's the engine. But Naveen brings in another personal loss, another angle on the same criminal world. His connection comes through the reporter in his life, someone looking into the same trafficking ring before getting pulled into its violence. So suddenly the story isn't only about a kidnapped child, it's about two separate families being shattered by the same system. On paper, That's a smart move. It gives Wang someone to bounce off, even if Wang himself barely speaks, and it keeps the movie from becoming one silent man walking from fight to fight with nobody to carry the human side of the story. Naveen adds urgency, frustration, and a more verbal emotional presence. He can ask questions, he can react out loud, he can push scenes forward in a way Wang, by design, can't. Joe Taslim helps a lot here. He has that natural screen warmth that makes Naveen easy to follow. Even when the dialogue isn't doing him any favors, he brings enough charisma and physical confidence to make the character feel useful. You believe he belongs in the action. You believe he has his own reason to be there. And when he steps into the fights, he doesn't feel like a sidekick being dragged along by the real hero. He feels dangerous in his own right. But the problem is the writing doesn't always give Naveen the weight he should have. His personal tragedy should feel just as sharp as Wang's, but sometimes it plays more like a plot function. He enters the story because Wang needs an ally, and honestly, because the movie needs someone who can speak more freely. Since Wang is silent, Naveen often becomes the person who explains, reacts, and fills in the gaps. That's useful structurally, but it also makes him feel a little mechanical at times, like the movie needed a voice, so it gave Wang one in human form. That's not to say Naveen is bad, not at all. In fact, he makes the film more watchable in the quieter moments. His presence gives the story a little more shape, and his connection to the reporter adds another reason to hate the people behind the trafficking ring. But the subplot itself doesn't always land with the emotional force it could have had. You can feel the movie reaching for a bigger tragedy: a father trying to save his daughter, a husband or partner trying to find the woman he loves, two men from different places pushed into the same violent current. That could have been really powerful if the film had spent more time developing the emotional side of it, but the Furious is impatient. It keeps glancing at these human details, then immediately turns back toward the next fight, and because the action is so strong, you mostly go with it. Still, there's a part of you that can see the better drama hiding underneath the chaos. Naveen's story is one of those pieces that feels like it had more potential than the script fully used. Even so, the team-up works where it matters most. Wang brings the silent rage, Naveen brings the voice, the urgency, and his own kind of pain. Together, they give the movie a little more emotional texture than it would have had with only one unstoppable father tearing through bad guys. It's not a perfectly balanced partnership. Wang is clearly the heart of the film, but Naveen gives the journey a second pulse, and in a movie this aggressive, that extra pulse helps keep the violence from feeling completely one-note. One of the reasons The Furious works as well as it does is that the cast understands the kind of movie they're in. This isn't a film where every performance is built around long emotional speeches or subtle dramatic layering. A lot of the acting here is physical. It's in the way someone enters a room, how they square up before a fight, how they take a hit, how they sell exhaustion, pain, anger, fear, and that little flash of panic when the fight suddenly turns against them. On that level, the main cast really delivers. Xie Miao is the obvious anchor. As Wang Wei, he has to carry a lot without saying much, and that's not easy. A silent action hero can become boring very quickly if the actor doesn't have enough presence. But Xie Miao has that controlled intensity. He doesn't need to overplay anything. He looks like a man holding himself together by force. And once the violence starts, you feel that pressure finally breaking loose. What makes him stand out is that he doesn't just look skilled, he looks emotionally locked into the movement. Every punch feels like it has purpose behind it. Every desperate push forward feels connected to the fact that this is a father trying to get his child back. That's what separates him from just being the guy who fights well. He gives the action a pulse. Joe Taslim brings a different kind of energy as Naveen. He's more open, more expressive, and naturally more charismatic in the traditional sense. Since Wang is silent, Taslim ends up carrying a lot of the verbal weight, and even when the dialogue isn't great, he keeps the character from feeling lifeless. He has warmth on screen, but he also has that believable physical danger where you never question whether he can hold his own once things turn ugly. That matters, because this movie can't afford weak action performers. The fights are too demanding. The camera is too close to the movement. You can't fake your way through scenes like this with quick cutting and shaky framing. Now the performers have to actually move, react, fall, strike, and keep the rhythm alive. That's where the cast earns a lot of respect. You can feel the effort, you can feel the training, you can feel how much coordination is happening inside every chaotic-looking moment. The supporting cast adds a lot too. Brian T makes a strong impression as the kind of role where you immediately understand why people walked away talking about him. He has a physical sharpness that catches your eye even in a movie packed with fighters. Yayan Ruhian, of course, brings his usual danger at the second he appears. Anyone who knows action cinema already starts waiting for the movie to unleash him properly. Joey Winato also adds a memorable presence, bringing a different fighting style and a clean physical confidence to his scenes. Even the younger performers deserve credit. The child actors could have easily been used only as emotional props, but they're better than that. They don't overdo it, and they give the danger enough reality without turning every scene into forced melodrama. Wang's daughter, especially, gives the story a little more heart than the script sometimes provides on its own. Now, not every performance lands. Some of the side characters feel stiff. A few of the smaller police roles come off awkward, especially when the dialogue starts working against them. There are moments where the acting suddenly feels less like a serious action thriller and more like an old dubbed martial arts movie from another era. Depending on your taste, that might be charming or distracting. For me, it's a bit of both. But the important thing is that when the movie needs its cast to fight, they show up. And in The Furious, that's not a small thing. This is a film where screen presence is measured in bruises, speed, footwork, timing, and whether you can make a fight feel like it's actually costing you something. The best performers here do exactly that. They give the movie its physical credibility, so even when the writing gets rough, the cast keeps the film moving. Not always through dialogue, not always through traditional drama, but through bodies in motion, through intensity, through that rare feeling that the people on screen aren't just acting inside the action, they are the action. The villains in The Furious aren't exactly complicated people, let's be honest about that right away. Most of them are written in very broad strokes, cruel, violent, corrupt, and disgusting enough that the movie never has to work too hard to make you hate them. There's no grand moral debate here, no tragic villain philosophy, no layered backstory that makes you wonder how they became this way. They're bad people doing horrible things, and the movie mostly uses them as bodies standing between Wang and his daughter. For a film like this, that's both a weakness and, weirdly, part of the design. As characters, the villains are thin. Some details get tossed in, like personal relationships or little hints of background, but they don't add much. You can feel the script trying to give certain bad guys a bit more texture, but it never goes deep enough for them to become fully interesting outside the fights. You don't remember them because of great writing, you remember them because of what they do physically. That's where The Furious is much stronger. Even when the villains are simple on the page, several of them have real screen impact. They look dangerous, they move differently, they bring different kinds of threat into the action scenes. And in a martial arts movie, that matters a lot. Brian Liu is a good example. He has a sharp, intense presence that immediately stands out. He doesn't need pages of dialogue to feel like a problem. You see him, you see how he carries himself, and you understand this isn't just another disposable henchman waiting to be knocked down. There's a physical confidence to him that makes his scenes pop. Yayan Ruhian brings a different kind of excitement. If you know him from The Raid, the moment he shows up, your brain already starts preparing for violence. That's the power of casting someone with that kind of action reputation. Even before he's fully unleashed, his presence creates anticipation. You're not watching him thinking, what's his emotional motivation? You're thinking, okay, when is this guy going to explode? And when the movie lets these fighters loose, that's when the villains finally become memorable. Joey Winato also adds flavor, because his physical style feels distinct. The movie benefits from having enemies who don't all fight the same way. Some are more brutal, Some are faster, some bring a more technical edge, some just feel like walking walls of muscle and anger. The writing may not give them much interior life, but the choreography gives them identity. That's probably the best way to understand the villains in this movie. They're not deep dramatic characters, they're action obstacles with personality built through movement. Their fighting styles, their weapons, their body language, and their willingness to go further than expected become their characterization. In a better written version of the film, maybe they would have been both physically memorable and dramatically interesting. Here, you mostly get the first one. The main villain suffers from this the most. The movie clearly wants him to feel important, but he's still pretty generic as a character. He represents the evil system more than he feels like a fully formed person. He's there to be hated, feared, and eventually confronted. It's enough for the plot, but not enough to make him a truly great villain. Still, there's something satisfying about how straightforward the movie is with its bad guys. It doesn't ask you to sympathize with them, it doesn't soften them, it doesn't waste time pretending they're misunderstood. These are people involved in something so ugly that the audience is basically waiting for the punishment to begin. And because the action is so vicious, the movie turns that waiting into a kind of brutal payoff. So yes, the villains are generic, but they're not useless. They give the heroes bodies to crash into, styles to overcome, and escalating threats to survive. They may not be unforgettable as written characters, but as physical opponents, several of them leave a mark. And in The Furious, that physical mark counts for a lot. The real reason people are going to talk about The Furious isn't the plot, it's the fighting. That sounds obvious for a martial arts movie, I know, but there's a difference between a movie having fight scenes and a movie being built out of fight scenes with this much force, imagination, and actual physical personality. The Furious doesn't treat action like a bonus, it treats action like the language of the whole film, and honestly, that's where it becomes kinda ridiculous. In a good way. The choreography here has that rare quality where it feels planned down to the smallest beat but still looks like everyone is fighting for their life. You can tell the movements are designed, rehearsed, and carefully shaped, but the impact doesn't feel soft. It doesn't feel like actors politely waiting for their turn. It feels mean. It feels desperate. It feels like every person in the room is trying to end the other one as quickly as possible. That's what gives the action its bite. A lot of modern action movies try to create energy by cutting fast. They shake the camera, hide the movement, throw in a loud sound effect, and hope the audience feels intensity. The Furious doesn't need to cheat like that. The intensity is already there in the bodies. The fighters are moving fast, but the movie still lets you understand what's happening. You see the space, the hits, the little adjustments, the counters, the mistakes, the recoveries, and those little details matter. Someone ducks too late, someone blocks one strike but doesn't see the next one coming. A fighter changes rhythm mid-combination, a weapon gets knocked away, and suddenly the whole room becomes the weapon. These fights aren't just hero punches villain. Villain punches hero. They keep evolving while you're watching them. That's why the choreography feels alive. It's brutal, yes, but it's also weirdly elegant at times. Not elegant in a clean, polished, ballet-like way, more like controlled chaos. The kind where a person gets smashed into furniture, rolls out of it, grabs something off the floor, and suddenly the fight has shifted into a completely new shape. You're watching violence, but you're also watching timing, spacing, rhythm, and creativity. The film understands that a great fight scene needs escalation. It can't just start loud and stale out. It has to build, to surprise you, to make you think, okay, that was the big moment, and then immediately prove you wrong. The Furious does that again and again. Just when a fight seems like it's used every possible idea, the choreography finds one more, a different angle, a new object, a nastier hit, a change in fighting style, something. That constant invention is what keeps the action from feeling empty. Even when the story is thin, the fights have structure. They tell many stories inside themselves. Who has control? Who's losing stamina? Who's adapting faster? Who's getting desperate? You can follow that without anyone explaining it. The choreography does the storytelling the script sometimes can't. That's probably the highest compliment I can give the movie. The best scenes in The Furious don't just look cool, they make you feel the characters thinking through violence. They're not randomly throwing moves at each other, they're reading the room, reading the opponent, trying to survive the next 3 seconds. That gives the action a texture a lot of movies miss. It's also just insanely fun to watch. There are moments where the fighting becomes so intense, so creatively nasty, that you almost laugh out of disbelief, not because it's silly, exactly, but because the movie keeps raising the bar in ways that feel impossible. You keep waiting for it to run out of ideas, and somehow it keeps finding more. That's why the choreography isn't just the best part of The Furious, it is the movie. Everything else exists around it. The simple revenge plot, the underwritten villains, the clunky dialogue, even the emotional motivation, all of it is there to push us into these fights. And when the action is operating at this level, that bargain mostly works, because when The Furious starts moving, it reminds you what martial arts cinema can do when the performers, camera, editing, and choreography all trust the audience enough to actually show the work. You feel the hits. You see the craft, and for action fans, that's the whole reason to show up. One thing The Furious understands better than a lot of modern action movies is that a fight scene shouldn't feel like it could happen in an empty white room. The space matters. That sounds simple, but it makes a huge difference. In this movie, the characters aren't just trading punches in front of the camera, they're constantly using whatever's around them. A ladder, a hammer, a door, a bow and arrow, some random tool on the floor. If it exists in the room, there's a good chance somebody's going to get hit with it, thrown into it, trapped by it, or forced to fight around it. That gives the action a really nasty kind of creativity. You never feel like the fights are just repeating the same rhythm over and over. Even when the movie is basically moving from one brawl to the next, the environment keeps changing the flavor. A room becomes a trap. A hallway becomes a pressure cooker. A simple object suddenly becomes the most dangerous thing in the scene. It keeps you watching the background, because anything can become part of the choreography. That's where the movie feels closest to classic martial arts cinema and old-school Hong Kong action, which never simply asks how strong is this fighter. It asks, how smart is this fighter when the situation changes? And The Furious is full of that. Characters adapt mid-fight. They lose weapons, grab new ones, switch angles, change their footing, and react to whatever the other person throws at them. It isn't clean, it isn't polite, it feels like survival. The hammer fight is probably the easiest example to point to. There's just something instantly satisfying about watching a movie take a basic tool and turn it into a full-on action centerpiece. It has that old boy echo, obviously, but it doesn't feel like the film is only winking at another movie. It uses the hammer because it fits this world. This is a dirty, painful, improvised kind of violence. Nobody's waiting for the perfect weapon, they use what's there, and the film keeps expanding that idea. You get hand-to-hand combat, but then it folds in weapons. You get weapons, but then the setting itself becomes part of the fight. You get clean martial arts movement, but then suddenly the scene turns into grappling, groundwork, throws, dirty counters, close-range panic. That variety is one of the biggest reasons the movie stays exciting for so long. It isn't just kung fu in one flavor, there are shades of different styles moving through the film. You can feel the old-school directness of Chinese martial arts. You can see more grounded, close contact work in the grappling and throws. There are moments that bring in judo, Wing Chun, Bajikan, Pencaksilat, MMA style exchanges, and that rough Indonesian action energy people associate with films like The Raid. The movie doesn't stop to lecture you about those styles. Thankfully it just lets them collide, which is more fun anyway, because when different fighting styles meet, the scenes feel less predictable. One fighter might be sharper with strikes, another better at controlling the body, another more animalistic and explosive, someone else using distance, speed, or weapons. The movie keeps letting these approaches crash into each other, and that gives the fights personality. That's important, Because action can become boring when everyone moves the same way. Here, the best sequences have texture. You're not only watching who wins, you're watching how they fight, how they solve problems, how they deal with pain, how quickly they adjust when the opponent isn't giving them the kind of fight they expected. Again, the objects make all of this even better. A fight in The Furious can start as a clean martial arts exchange and turn into something completely chaotic within seconds. Somebody grabs a tool, somebody gets slammed into furniture, somebody uses the room to create distance, somebody else closes the distance immediately. The geography keeps shifting, but the action usually stays readable, which is key. The movie is wild, but you're not lost. That's why the environmental combat works so well. It doesn't feel like random chaos thrown at the screen. It feels designed, but still dangerous. It feels like the characters are thinking with their bodies, using the room faster than most people could even process. And when that clicks, The Furious becomes more than just brutal, it becomes inventive. A lot of action movies give you violence. This one gives you violence with tools, rhythm, style, movement, and a room full of bad decisions waiting to happen. The thing about The Furious is that it doesn't really have one action scene. The whole movie depends on it. It has several. That's part of why the film hits as hard as it does. It's not saving everything for the last 20 minutes and asking you to sit through a dull movie until then. From early on, it keeps throwing set pieces at you that feel like they were designed to make action fans lean forward and go, okay, wait, how far are they taking this? And usually the answer is farther than expected. The first major fight already tells you what kind of movie you're watching. It's not clean, glossy, or overly polished. It has this rough physical energy where the bodies actually feel like they're crashing into each other. The movie isn't interested in making violence look cool in a detached way. It wants you to feel the impact, wants the hits to look painful, wants the room to feel dangerous. Then you get moments like the hammer fight, and that's where the movie really starts showing off its personality. A hammer is such a simple thing, but in the right action scene, it becomes terrifying. Every swing feels ugly, every miss still feels dangerous. And because The Furious is so committed to using ordinary objects in brutal ways, scenes like this stick in your head. It's not just here's another fight, it's here's a fight built around one nasty idea, and we're going to squeeze every bit of tension out of it. The truck chase also gives the movie an almost ridiculous action hero energy. You can question the realism, you probably should have, but in the moment, it has that wild, old-school feeling where a character's determination becomes bigger than logic. Wayne isn't moving like a normal man anymore, he's moving like pure panic and rage with legs. And honestly, that's the kind of thing a movie like this can get away with when the tone is already operating at such an extreme level. There are also the more specialized fights, like the MMA scene and the ice scene. The MMA scene works because it gives the action a different texture, a more controlled at first, more contained, but still vicious. You get that clash of technique and brutality, where the fight isn't just about who can punch harder but who can adapt faster. It gives the movie a chance to shift rhythm without slowing down. The ice scene is a bit more divisive. Some people will love the visual idea and the danger of the setting, others might get pulled out by the effects or think it looks a little goofy in places. I can understand both reactions, but even when the scene isn't perfect, it still has that furious attitude of trying to make every fight feel different. The movie doesn't want the action to blur together, it wants each set piece to have its own hook. And then, of course, there's the final showdown. This is the one people are going to remember. The climax is massive, exhausting, bloody, and almost absurdly committed. It feels less like a normal final fight and more like the movie throwing every remaining idea it has onto the screen. Different fighters, different styles, different weapons, shifting spaces, bodies hitting the ground, people getting back up when they absolutely should not. It just keeps going and going and going. For some viewers, that's going to be the peak of the whole experience, the kind of finale where you're sitting there almost laughing because the movie refuses to calm down. Every time you think it's reached its limit, it finds another layer, another opponent, another impact, another cruel little twist in the choreography. For others, I can see it becoming too much. The final battle is long, very long. There's a point where you might think, okay, this has to be the ending, and then the film basically says, nope, we still have more bones to break. Depending on your mood, that's either amazing or exhausting, maybe both. But even when it stretches itself, the craft is hard to deny. The finale feels like a full showcase for everything the movie does best: a brutal hand-to-hand combat, environmental weapons, clashing martial arts styles, clear camera movement, and performers who look like they're genuinely putting their bodies through hell. It's not just big because it's long, it's big because the movie keeps changing the rhythm inside the chaos, and that's what saves it from becoming only noise. The best parts of the climax have shape. You can feel momentum shifting, you can feel fighters getting more desperate, you can feel the movie trying to top itself in real time. And even if a few minutes could have been trimmed, there's something kind of admirable about how completely it refuses to hold back. This doesn't end with a polite final punch and a neat little wrap-up. It ends like an action movie trying to empty the tank. And that's why the set pieces matter so much. They're not just interruptions in the story, they're the reason the movie exists. The first fight sets the tone, the hammer fight shows the creativity, the chase shows the madness, the MMA and ice sequences add variety, and the final showdown turns the whole thing into a full-blown martial arts endurance test. Is it too much? Maybe, but with The Furious, too much is kind of the point. What really separates The Furious from a lot of disposable action movies is that the action doesn't feel accidental. It feels engineered, not in a cold, mechanical way. More like every department understands the same mission: make the fights hit as hard as possible, and make sure the audience can actually see them. That second part sounds basic, but in modern action, it's weirdly rare. Too many movies cut around movement, hide the impact, or shake the camera so much that the audience has to imagine the fight instead of watching it. The Furious doesn't have that problem. Kenji Tanigaki's direction has real confidence when the movie is in motion. You can feel that he understands bodies, timing, and physical space. He's not just pointing the camera at stunt performers and hoping intensity appears. The scenes are built around movement, around rhythm, around letting one hit lead into the next, and letting the environment become part of the fight instead of just background decoration. That's why the camera work stands out so much. The camera is active, but it isn't confused. It moves with the performers, circles around them, shifts angles, follows bodies across rooms, and still usually keeps the geography clear. You understand where people are, who's attacking from which side, when someone's cornered, when someone has space, and when the whole fight is about to collapse into chaos. That kind of clarity makes the brutality more effective, because if you can't see the hit, you can't feel the hit. And The Furious wants you to feel every impact. The punches, kicks, falls, weapon strikes, body slams, they all land because the film is willing to show the work. It trusts the performers, it trusts the choreography, it trusts the audience to keep up. The editing mostly supports that too. For the action, the cuts feel designed to maintain flow rather than cover weakness. You're not getting chopped up nonsense where every punch needs 5 angles. The fights have momentum, and the editing lets that momentum breathe. It stitches together complicated movement without draining the energy out of it, which isn't easy, especially when the choreography is this packed with detail. Of course, the editing isn't flawless. Some scenes do stretch. There are moments where the action keeps going past the point where a tighter cut might have made it hit even harder. And outside the fights, the pacing can feel less controlled. You can sometimes feel the film trying to get through its dramatic material so it can return to what it does best. But inside the action, that's where the craft really clicks. The sound design is another big part of it. The hits have weight. The bodies sound heavy, the weapons feel nasty. A hammer doesn't just look dangerous, it sounds dangerous. When someone crashes into a surface, the sound helps sell the pain. That's important in a movie this physical, because the audio has to match the violence on screen. Still, the sound is also where one of the film's biggest distractions shows up. The ADR and dubbing can be rough. Sometimes voices don't quite match faces. Sometimes the line delivery feels slightly detached from the scene, like the dialogue was added from another room after the fact. It isn't always enough to ruin a moment, but it can pull you out, especially during quieter dramatic scenes where the movie already feels less natural. That's the strange split with The Furious. When it's using sound to sell impact, it works. When it's using sound to sell dialogue, it becomes shakier. The practical craft, though, deserves real credit. The makeup, the gore effects, the beat-up faces, the bruises, the blood, the physical damage, all of it adds texture to the violence. Even when the characters survive way more punishment than any normal human should, the movie still tries to make the damage visible. People look worn down. They look battered. They look like the fights are costing them something, at least in the moment. And that matters, because this film could easily have felt weightless. With this much exaggerated violence, one bad choice could have turned the whole thing into empty cartoon noise. But the practical details help ground it. Blood, sweat, broken expressions, messy injuries, bodies moving with exhaustion. Now those touches keep reminding you the performers are giving this everything they have. The score also does its job without taking over the movie. It supports the tone, pushes the action forward, and gives certain scenes that extra surge of genre energy. It's not necessarily the first thing you walk away talking about, but it helps the film maintain that gritty, aggressive rhythm. So, as a technical action package, The Furious is seriously impressive. Not perfect, not polished in every corner. The dubbing issues are real. Some editing choices could be tighter. Some sound choices feel a little artificial. But when the movie is doing what it was built to do, staging bodies in motion, capturing impact, letting choreography breathe, it's operating at a level most action films would love to reach. That's the craft behind the chaos. The fights look wild, but they're not random. The camera is moving, but it's not lost. The editing is energetic, but mostly readable. The sound is aggressive, but usually effective. And the practical work gives the violence a grimy, painful texture. Basically, The Furious works because the people making it understand a simple truth. Action isn't just about movement. It's about how you show movement, how you cut it, how you hear it, and how much you make the audience believe that every hit actually matters. The Furious is violent in a way that doesn't really pretend to be tasteful. It's not just action movie violent, where people get punched, fall down neatly, and the camera moves on. This movie wants the impact to look ugly. It wants the hits to feel nasty. People are smashed, stabbed, slammed, crushed, thrown, beaten, and dragged through fights that go way past normal human limits. And honestly, that's part of the appeal. The violence has a raw, almost savage quality to it. You can feel the anger behind it. This isn't a clean superhero fight where everyone looks perfectly posed between strikes. The fights in The Furious feel sweaty, desperate, and mean. When a hammer comes out, it feels like a terrible idea. When somebody crashes into the floor, you feel it. When a character gets back up after taking punishment, you're not always thinking, "That makes sense." Sometimes you're thinking, "There is absolutely no way this person is still alive." And that's where the movie becomes a little ridiculous. Characters in this film survive things that would end most fights immediately, not just slow them down, end them. Broken bones, brutal head hits, car impacts, weapons, blood loss, repeated beatings. And yet people keep standing up, keep swinging, keep finding one more burst of energy, like their bodies are running on pure revenge and broken physics. At some point, realism leaves the room. The question is whether that bothers you. For some viewers, it definitely will. The movie is so brutal that you expect consequences. If a scene is staged with this much blood and impact, then injuries should matter. A character should slow down. A wound should change the way they move. A hit that looks devastating shouldn't just disappear 5 minutes later. And when that happens anyway, it can make the danger feel less real. That's the strange tension inside The Furious. The violence is presented with weight, but the characters have almost superhero-level durability. So the movie asks you to feel the pain while also accepting that these fighters can absorb an absurd amount of damage. Sometimes that contrast is exciting, sometimes it's distracting. It depends on how willing you are to meet the film on its own terms, because this isn't a realistic crime thriller. Not really. It has a dark subject, a desperate father, and a violent criminal world. But the action belongs to a heightened universal world where rage can keep a man moving longer than logic would allow, where a fight can turn into a full-blown endurance trial, where someone should probably be unconscious but instead grabs the nearest object and makes the scene even worse for everyone else. And if you can accept that, the movie becomes much easier to enjoy. You stop judging every injury by real-world rules and start watching it like a brutal martial arts comic book brought to life. Not weightless exactly, but exaggerated, bigger than real life, meaner than real life. The kind of action where the body is treated less like a fragile human thing and more like a weapon that refuses to break until the movie is finished with it. That doesn't excuse every moment. There are definitely scenes where the lack of consequences undercuts the impact. If everyone can survive almost anything, the tension can start to wobble. You still enjoy the choreography, but part of your brain is whispering, "Come on, that guy would be finished by now." And yes, sometimes he absolutely would be, but The Furious is so committed to its own insanity that the exaggeration becomes part of its personality. It's not asking for quiet realism, it's asking you to lock into the rhythm, accept the blood-soaked madness, and let the action hit you on a more instinctive level. The movie wants gasps, laughs of disbelief, winces, and that weird action fan reaction where something is so over the top you can't help but respect the nerve of it. That's why the brutality works more often than it doesn't, because underneath all the impossible durability, the fights still have craft. The hits are staged well, the bodies move with purpose, the gore and damage give the scenes texture. Even when your logical brain knows this is absurd, your action movie brain is having too much fun to fully complain. So yes, The Furious is unrealistic, very unrealistic, but it isn't lazy about it. It builds a world where pain matters in the moment. Even if the long-term consequences are questionable, it gives you violence that's bloody, excessive, sometimes cartoonish, sometimes genuinely vicious, and almost always designed to make you react. And maybe that's the best way to watch it. Don't go in expecting realism, go in expecting impact. Go in expecting people to keep fighting long after common sense has left the building. Go in expecting the kind of movie where broken bodies somehow find one more hit, one more weapon, one more reason to stand up. Because in The Furious, survival isn't about medical logic, it's about whether the fight scene is done with you yet. The pacing in The Furious is a funny thing, because depending on who you ask, it's either one of the movie's biggest strengths or one of the things that wears you down by the end. And honestly, both reactions make sense. On one hand, this movie moves. It really moves. It doesn't spend forever setting up the world, explaining every relationship, or building some complicated web of crime movie politics. It gives you the premise, point swing in the direction of the people responsible, and then basically starts throwing bodies into motion. For action fans, that's kind of refreshing. There's very little dead air here. Even when the movie slows down, it never feels like it's fully stopped, and you can sense the next burst of violence waiting around the corner. The quiet scenes are more like brief moments to breathe before the next fight scene kicks the door open. In that sense, The Furious has a strong forward drive. It knows the audience came for action, and it doesn't make them wait too long to get it. But that much action creates its own problem. After a while, even great fight scenes can start to blur together if the movie doesn't give them enough contrast. And The Furious comes close to that line a few times. The choreography is incredible, the performers are giving everything, the camera is alive, but there are stretches where the film is pushing so hard for so long that you can start to feel the weight of it. Not boredom exactly, more like action fatigue. There's only so much punching, smashing, stabbing, slamming, And bone-cracking a movie can throw at you before your brain starts asking for a little more shape between the chaos. The film does try to vary things with different settings, weapons, and fighting styles, and that helps a lot. But because the story is so thin, the action has to carry almost everything, so when a fight runs even slightly too long, you feel it. That's especially true near the climax. The final stretch is hugely wild, impressive, packed with the kind of martial arts insanity that action fans dream about, but it's also long enough that you may find yourself thinking, okay, this is amazing, but are we still going? And then, yes, the movie is still going. Another opponent, another phase, another brutal exchange, another round of punishment that should have ended 5 minutes ago. For some viewers, that's going to be the best part. For others, it might be where the movie crosses from thrilling into exhausting. I don't think the long runtime destroys the film, but I do think a tighter version might have hit even harder. Sometimes cutting a few minutes doesn't make a movie feel smaller, it makes the impact sharper. The Furious has so much action that trimming certain scenes could have made the whole thing feel more relentless in a cleaner way, because relentless and repetitive aren't the same thing. When the movie is at its best, it's relentless. Every fight escalates, every movement has purpose, every set piece finds a new idea. But when it stretches itself too far, it risks becoming repetitive, even if the individual moments are well made. That's the danger of building almost the entire movie around action. Now the action has to keep evolving, or the audience starts to feel the pattern. Thankfully, The Furious usually does find enough new tricks to keep itself alive. A different weapon, a different room, a different style, a different rhythm. That variety is what saves it from becoming just one long brawl. But still, there are moments where the movie feels like it could have trusted itself to stop a little earlier. Not every fight needs one extra phase. Not every ending needs another ending after it. That's probably the most honest way to describe the pacing. It's exciting, but not always disciplined. The movie has incredible momentum, but it sometimes mistakes more for better. Most of the time, more actually is better here, because the craft is so strong. But by the end, you may feel like you've been through a full physical workout just sitting in the chair. Maybe that's part of the experience. The Furious doesn't want to be smooth and balanced. It wants to overwhelm you. It wants you leaving the theater slightly stunned, maybe laughing, maybe tired, maybe wondering how many stunt performers needed ice packs after filming. It isn't a clean, perfectly measured action film. It's a movie that keeps swinging until somebody forces it to stop. And I kind of respect that. Even when it goes too long, at least it goes too long because it has too much energy, too many ideas, too much physical madness spilling out of it. There are worse problems for an action movie to have. So yes, The Furious could be tighter. Some scenes could be trimmed. The finale could probably lose a few minutes and still be incredible. The non-stop action may be too much for viewers who need more story, more quiet, or more emotional breathing room. But if you're the kind of viewer who wants action cinema to leave you bruised by the time the credits roll, then the overload isn't just a flaw, it's part of the thrill. The easiest way to sell The Furious is also the laziest way to sell it. You say, it's like Taken mixed with The Raid, and most action fans immediately understand the general shape of the thing: a father trying to rescue his daughter, a criminal underworld, a whole army of people about to regret showing up to work that day. Then you add the physical intensity, the brutal martial arts, the non-stop escalation, and yeah, the comparison basically writes itself. But the movie is a little more interesting than just that, because The Furious feels like it's pulling from a whole shelf of action history. You can feel echoes of The Raid, not just because of the cast connections, but because of the way fights are staged. Rooms become war zones. Bodies crash into bodies. Every opponent feels like another wall the heroes have to break through. Then there's that John Wick feeling, not in the gun fu sense, but in the way people talk about it afterward, that you have to see this scene energy, that sense that the movie is trying to raise the ceiling for what modern action can look like. You can argue about whether it fully reaches those heights, but it's absolutely playing in that conversation. And then you get the older DNA old Hong Kong action, Jet Li, Jackie Chan, the kind of martial arts cinema where movement is the main attraction and the story is there to give the fighting a pulse. There are moments where The Furious feels like a throwback to those wild, bruising kung fu movies that didn't care much about being subtle. Bad guys are bad, heroes are pushed too far, and the audience is there to watch skill, pain, and chaos collide. There are even flashes that make you think of Oldboy, especially when the movie starts turning tools and cramped spaces into punishment, and when things get larger than life, almost game-like. You can understand why someone might connect it to something like the Yakuza games. It has that same exaggerated street brawl madness, where realism isn't the point. Style, impact, and escalation are the point. That's where the cult appeal comes in. The Furious feels like the kind of movie action fans will pass around, not necessarily because it's flawless, but because it has scenes people will want to show each other at the hammer fight, the final showdown, the moments where somebody uses an object in a way that makes the whole theater react. This isn't a watch-it-once-and-forget-it action film. It has that Discovery movie quality, where one person sees it, tells 3 friends, and suddenly everyone is arguing about where it ranks next to The Raid or John Wick Chapter 4. Now, do I think it's for everybody? No, absolutely not. If you need a layered plot, careful character development, realistic injuries, and polished dramatic dialogue, this movie is probably going to frustrate you. If you're sensitive to gore, same thing. The Furious isn't gentle. It's bloody, loud, sometimes awkward, and very happy to choose another fight scene over a deeper conversation. But for martial arts fans, that trade-off is probably going to be worth it. This is the kind of movie that benefits from being watched big, loud, and preferably with other people who are ready to react. A crowd helps. You want that shared disbelief when a fight keeps escalating. You want the laughs, the gasps, the little murmurs when the choreography does something nasty. Watching it at home will still work, sure, but the theatrical experience gives the madness extra electricity. That said, casual viewers might be better off streaming it later. Not because the film is weak, but because it's so specifically built for people who love this kind of action. If you're only mildly interested, the thin story and long fights may start to feel like too much. But if you're the kind of viewer who rewatches fight scenes on YouTube, studies choreography, or still talks about the hallway fight in Oldboy and the apartment chaos in The Raid, then this one isn't optional. You should see it. Maybe it isn't the cleanest action movie. Maybe it borrows from a lot of places. Maybe some of the hype is a little overheated. But honestly, I'd rather watch a movie that swings too hard than one that plays everything safe. And The Furious swings like it has something to prove. It has flaws, but it also has that rare action movie spark.